So my 8-year-old has spoken speech. My 6-year-old does not speak very much, and he uses ASL signs to communicate. And my 3-year-old does a little bit of both. And then we also, for all of our kids, even my typical hearing child, we use visual schedules and other visuals in our house to communicate routines through pictures.
Welcome to Transforming the Toddler Years, a Core 4 parenting podcast for conscious, cycle-breaking parents ready to turn toddler tantrums into teachable moments. Hi, I'm Cara Tyrrell, a lifetime lover of littles, mom to 2 grown and flown girls, and an early childhood educator. Through the show, I teach you my collaborative parenting methodology for nurturing your little human's mind, body, and spirit. Because how you connect and collaborate in the first 5 years is how you raise happy, healthy kids who grow into the best version of themselves and find true success in school and life. Welcome back, Toddler Tribe. Does your child have a speech delay? Are they struggling with communication and language? Maybe they even have a hearing loss. Today's guest is Alaine Jacobs. She has 3 kids who are 8, 6, and 3, and her 2 oldest boys were born deaf. Her story is really fascinating of how they navigated learning language differently for each kid based on their hearing loss, their ability to take in audiological information. And then her third is a typically developing hearing kiddo. This is a really fun episode because her little girl actually popped in near the end. So if you hear some little people in the background having some fun participating, just lean into it. This is real life. And this supermom blew me away with her ability to stay on task and have this amazing conversation while also kind of wrangling that wiggly human who so badly wanted to participate. Alaine, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have a conversation with you today about language and little people.
Hi. Yes. Thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, I'm really excited too.
So this is a really cool episode because we're niching down a little bit. You are the mom of kids who were born deaf, and I have a history in the education world and the teaching world, and even as a mom with a little one who had some hearing loss. So we're going to explore all that today and then really tap into the idea that kids, as a general rule, whether they have hearing loss or not, need to be communicated with in a really specific way.
Right. I agree.
So can you tell us your story, how this all came to be? Because you're a former teacher as well.
I am. Yeah. So I am, funnily enough, a foreign language teacher. I'm a high school Spanish teacher before my life of having kids. And basically what kind of like brought me into all this is just like you were saying earlier is my 2 children, so I have 3 children. And my first 2, my boys were born deaf. They were born with profound hearing loss, and they both got cochlear implants. And then I have a third little girl who is 3, and she has typical hearing. So we were really thrown into the world of like language and communication really early because we had those first 2 children with the hearing loss. And so if you know anything about kids with hearing loss, you have to be more intentional about building language and working with communication with them because of the gap in time that they lost out on hearing from the time that they were a baby. And so my boys were born with the hearing loss, and so they didn't hear until they were about 1 year old. And maybe even a little bit later by the time we got the cochlear implants, like ratcheted up and stuff like that. So, and, at one point we, had speech therapy with both of our boys, several times a week. And I was working with, basically 2 kind of toddlers / preschoolers, with 2 different kind of communication and language approaches. And we had to work on all of it in the day. And, so that is kind of what brought me to my approach, because I realized, okay, language and communication, this has to get done for my kids. It is a non-negotiable. Like, we have to learn to talk with them or communicate with them or sign with them or whatever we're going to do. So first of all, we have to figure out what we're going to do. And second of all, we have to figure out how to work on this during the day while also getting everything else done that you're doing with a preschool and a toddler and taking care of your house.
Wow. Wow. And so they're 2 years apart.
Yes, they are 2.5 years apart.
2.5 years apart. Oh, yeah. Okay. Calling all of my teachers and early childhood professionals. Cara here, just popping in to say thank you. One of my favorite things about this podcast is knowing that it's not just parents who are listening, that you are part of this toddler tribe too, because you serve them on a daily basis. Did you know that I do early childhood education trainings, pre-service, in-service? And as often as I can, I float around the United States and beyond to conferences to do the work to help you do the work. I would love to connect specifically with you. So here is an opportunity to get on a one-on-one call with me, work with me. Let's get together. It's totally a free consultation, and I would love to hear who you serve, their ages, their stages, their struggles, and what type of professional development you would benefit from most. Who knows? Maybe I'll create a whole new workshop just for you, your team, and the kids that you serve. Look forward to connecting with you. And now let's get you back to this amazing episode. For parents who are out there listening and they're like, well, my kid passed the hearing screening at birth, but now I'm wondering, what do you know about that space? Because it's really tricky when you're watching and you're observing your kids, and sometimes they seem to hear you evidenced by doing the thing you ask them to do, and sometimes they seem not to. And so that early development piece, it can get a little tricky. How soon would you recommend they go back for another hearing test?
So I would say if you are having questions, I would contact an audiologist as soon as possible. It was a little bit different journey for my kids because mine failed their newborn hearing screening in the hospital. So we started on that journey literally from the time we left the hospital. But the process is a little bit different if you have a child who, has progressive hearing loss, or you're finding out hearing loss a little bit later, maybe even if they're like age 2, which is pretty common, depending on, the type of hearing losses. So I would say, if you have any doubts or have any questions, go ahead and immediately go to, your pediatrician and get in with an audiologist and get that hearing checked, because it does matter in the communication and language aspect. And if your child has a hearing loss that you haven't identified yet, then they may just simply be missing out on some of that language piece during the day. And so they may not be getting a full sentence that you're saying or hearing every word. And that is going to really hinder them in kind of learning a full language, especially if you're talking about spoken language.
Right. Of course. Yes. And those gaps, they only get bigger. They don't get smaller if they don't get attended to. So I've heard you say a number of times, language and communication and language. Can you piece those out for us? Because communication can be a lot of things. It doesn't have to be words. And I know young kids are incredibly good at making up their own strategies or even home sign language that help them get their needs met. So where did that come into play for you? And can you piece that out so people understand the difference between communication and language?
Sure. Yeah. I think of language as either like spoken or signed. So kind of, what we're doing day to day and how, you talk to people. day. And then the communication is a little bit of a bigger approach, which to me also includes visuals, like a visual routine or a visual schedule. And we actually use all of those in our home. So my 8-year-old has spoken speech. My 6-year-old does not speak very much, and he uses ASL signs to communicate. And my 3-year-old does a little bit of both. And then we also, for all of our kids, even my typical hearing child, we use visual schedules and other visuals in our house to communicate routines through pictures. So we actually have like a language strategy in our home, and then we have a bigger communication strategy that includes the visuals for everybody.
That's amazing. I mean, talk about personalized learning in the space that really matters most. Wow. I'm so impressed.
Yeah, it's like layers of like communication and language, but we didn't, we started with kind of one language. So with our older one, we knew that he could hear very well with his cochlears. So we really started with the spoken speech with him. And then we added in a few ASL signs to kind of bridge that gap until he really started being able to talk back to us. And then he kind of let the signs fall off himself because then he could communicate spoken. And with my 6-year-old, we always knew that he still had some hearing gaps, even with his cochlears. So from the very beginning, when he was implanted with his cochlears, it was always recommended to us to use some type of visual or signed language. So with him, we did work on spoken speech for a long time until we could determine what he was and was not hearing. But we always paired that with an ASL sign. And so, like you were saying, it is really individual to the kids and how they prefer to communicate and how they can communicate given their, hearing loss and like hearing gaps. So it is. It's like a layered approach, but I do want to encourage parents that, you can start with one strategy and then we layer on the other strategies. So we don't have to start with, spoken, sign, visuals all at one time. And it is a process of seeing what works with your family and what works with your child.
Spoken like a true teacher.
Thank you.
I remember when our little one was diagnosed, she was, not talking in full sentences at 3. And I had started signing with her at birth because it just happens to be a skill I have. And I was all excited about raising a bilingual baby. It was going to be great. And then we realized this was actually her native language at this point. It was her bridge. That I was her interpreter for the world. So ultimately, that is exactly what happened for our Claire. Is she used the language that she had easier access to get her needs met. As we taught her, because after some procedures, she was able to recover that hearing. As we taught her to access her new ability and that speech. It was very, very cool. And the other side of it that I'd never been on before, but it did require a lot of attention and focused play at home. And I know that you are a huge proponent of practicing language through play. So can you share with us what that looks like outside of sitting with a speech and language person?
Definitely. And this really came up just because of the fact that I'm a busy mom, like we all are. And I did have those 2 kids. It was easier kind of doing more structured speech practice when I just had one child, of course. No, I mean, I had all day to practice with him. But then, when we had the second child and then I had a 2.5-year-old and I had a baby who was deaf again. And so we were going through this whole process again. We started speech therapy with both of our boys. And what happened is, we're on different levels of language ability. So within that, they had 2 separate speech therapy appointments. And then within those appointments, they had 2 separate speech therapy goals to practice. And, at that point, I was like, okay, I have to do the laundry, the cooking. There are obviously things that you have to do in your home every day and take care of the kids. And I want to have fun. I don't want to feel like I'm just, forcing them to practice language, or, I'm just kind of being teacher all the time. Like, I also want to be mom. So there's a balance to that approach. And I've got 2 kids who have different language goals. And like I said earlier, communication in language was a non-negotiable. We had to learn how to talk or communicate with each other. And so that's really where I kind of developed this, approach to practicing the speech therapy goals kind of in our daily routine and in playing with our kids. So what I would do and what I recommend for parents is to get those speech therapy goals that you're practicing and determine when during the day in your regular daily routine that you can practice those goals. So maybe, it's at breakfast time while you're eating, or it is, at lunch while you're eating, or it's on the playground while you're sliding down the slide, or you're playing in the sandbox. And while they're playing, you're just implementing those language goals and that language practice.
Well, and during play, their brains are lit up in a different way. They're already experiencing endorphins and dopamine, and they're enjoying what they're doing. And so there's an openness to just kind of sliding that little thing in there.
You have to be a little sneaky. Yeah. Well, and it also, for me, I was like, and I'm still like this, is, if I'm adding anything into my day, it has to fit within my daily routine. And, I think most parents are out there like that. I don't have a ton of time in the day to just add all these other things. So I have to be particular about what I'm adding in. And like I said, language, for us was a non-negotiable. We have to learn to talk to our kids. And I think that's true of most parents. And, it has to fit within what we're already doing during the day. So, when you have a toddler and a preschooler, what are you already doing? You're already playing. And you're right. They're already focused on something. And it doesn't feel forced. It feels really organic to just add in, those language practice skills while you're already playing and having fun. And it also kind of like makes a connection and a bond, which I know that you talk a lot about on your podcast, too, because you're teaching them, but you're also playing with them and bonding with them through, playing what they like to play. And so you're kind of making a connection, but also working on language skills at the same time.
Absolutely. Yes. And, right now, more than ever, there are kids who are being diagnosed with speech delays in our post-COVID educational experience, right? And there are parents who they don't necessarily have a hearing loss, these kids, but their communication frustration is through the roof. Their dictionary, their lexicon that they can pull from is so minimal compared to what their brain is creating for amazingness that they want to communicate. And so play is going to be the gateway there, 100%. So these parents might be new to the world of special services. So what are some of the questions that they want to ask their speech and language provider right out of the gate that is going to help them bridge what that person is doing with what they can do at home?
Yeah. So, I think first of all, I always go over at the end of a speech therapy session, what exactly are the goals that your speech therapist wants you to practice during the week? Because some speech therapists are really good at saying, okay, I want you to practice this. And then I've had other speech therapists who we kind of organically practiced during the session, which was great. But then sometimes I came out of the session like, I'm not sure what I should practice at home. So making sure you take 5 minutes at the end of your session and write down in a notebook, because if I didn't write it down, I definitely didn't remember it. Write down exactly what they want you to practice during the week so that you can come back to the next speech therapy session prepared and, moving forward even better because you've had that practice at home too. Because we know that you can't build language in an hour speech therapy session a week. It's a process of, engaging with your child throughout the day, talking with them. And if your child has hearing loss, then, taking those intentional moments to highlight those language skills to them is really the key. That's the main thing that I would ask. And then most speech therapists do at least once a year, like an evaluation. Mm-hmm. But, ask for an evaluation or an updated evaluation if you think your child is maybe imitating a lot of words, but you're not sure yet. I see this, it's like a common question. If they aren't like using them spontaneously themselves, so they're imitating, but you don't know if they actually know how to use the word. And ask your speech therapist, what are some things that you can do at home to help them move from just imitating the word to actually understanding how to use the word in context. Because we also know that learning a language, it has a lot of different layers to it. And you want to keep your child with your speech therapist moving through that process from hearing a word and just imitating it to moving through the process to being able to use that word and understand how to use it in the context of a sentence. Those are the two things that I would say to talk to a speech therapist about.
I am so glad you brought that up because there's such an emotional journey that goes on as a parent when you're watching your child who has a delay or a struggle or like a mountain they've got to, get past. And when they do something that to us reflects they mastered it, we want to believe it 110%. So having you say there's word recognition, there's parroting the word, there's saying it back, there's understanding what the word actually means, there's using it appropriately in context and syntax, there's showing understanding by going and doing the thing. Those are lots of different steps that show receptive language is developing.
Yeah, it's true. And I want to encourage parents, the first step is imitating the word. Mm-hmm. So that's a win. If you're working and you get your child to, or, usually you're doing this at the like baby and toddler phase. So if you get your baby and toddler, to imitate a word back to you, well, that's showing that they're paying attention to you and that they are hearing the word or they're seeing the sign if you're signing it and they're able to do that back to you. And so that is a first level and that is a win in itself. And then you can celebrate that and say, okay, what is the next level? The next level is, using the word when they see the object spontaneously. Yeah. And then the next level after that would be kind of using it in context, maybe when they're thinking about a sentence, but they don't necessarily like see the object in front of them type of thing. But, each step that you get to is definitely a win for you guys. So, I want to encourage parents that just imitating is not a win or like, it's just kind of like the first step in the process. And so celebrate that and then, work with your speech therapist to move on to the next step and do it all through play because that's what kids love doing. And that's what they're naturally good at is playing.
Can we celebrate right now? Because Alaine is a super mom right now. She is, if you could see her right now, she's had her 3-year-old on her lap for a good 10 minutes and just like making space and making her comfortable and allowing her to be part of this. And I celebrate that. I love it.
Thank you. We're pretty used to it over on my podcast. I know they're pretty used to hearing the kids come in and out because that's just, is what we do. We've got kids at home, but we all do.
Yes.
Probably. Or we have at some point, depending on at what point you're listening to this. So
yeah. Well, this was incredible. Thank you so much for your time today, for sharing everything you know, Alaine, and also for sharing the real life of being a mom, running a podcast, and raising amazing humans. We're so, so grateful you were here. And all of you out there, you know what to do. Stay mindful and proactive until our next episode of Transforming the Toddler Years.